just when you thought you'd seen it all. Introducing the Solaris 2 embroidery and sewing machine from Babylock. With revolutionary features including IQ Visionary Projector technology, you'll see how your design looks before you stitch it out for perfect placement every time. The Solaris 2 also comes equipped with the convenient features and technology and educational support you've come to expect from Babylock. Visit your local retailer today to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast by the staff of Threads magazine. I'm your host, Editorial Director Sarah McFarland, and I'm joined by Senior Technical Editor Carol Fresia.
Hi.
And during this episode, we're speaking with Claire Shaeffer. Hi, Claire, and welcome.
Thank you.
Claire's name will be very familiar to our listeners. She is a highly respected and prolific sewing educator and has contributed many articles to Threads. Claire is the author of more than 20 books and videos, including Couture Sewing Techniques and the Chanel-focused Couture Sewing series of books with accompanying videos. Claire also designs the custom couture collection for Vogue patterns, which include her marvelous sewing tips in the instructions. She's just finished a text on couture tailoring for Lawrence King Publishing. Claire's motto is, "I demystify couture," but her teachings help sewers of all skill levels expand their knowledge. She is one of only a handful of educators who have received both the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals Lifetime Achievement Award and the American Sewing Guild Hall of Fame Award. And I should mention today, I am coming to you very remotely. But welcome, Claire. It's such an honor to speak with you. We're very glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah.
We ask all of our guests to answer 5 questions so we can get to know them a little bit. So, Claire, the first question I have for you is, who taught you to sew?
I don't know. I know the first thing I made was a felt butterfly. I made it by hand, and it was a little sachet thing. I was a brownie. Then I remember making a red lace dress when I was in high school. And I'm assuming that I read the pattern, and if I had a question, I asked my mother or my grandmother, because both of them sewed, but neither really sat down and showed me how to sew. And the only lessons I had before I went to college was the package that came when I bought a sewing machine my senior year.
Sorry, folks, we're having some technical difficulties, so you're going to see us hopping around on the screen a little bit, except for maybe Sarah, who can't move at all. I have question number 2 now for Claire, and that is, what is your favorite sewing term?
This took a lot of thought. There are terms like control, but my favorite technique is zipper, and particularly the Yves Saint Laurent zipper. I saw this first on a gown which Yves Saint Laurent designed at Dior, but it wasn't until I saw it on tailored pants that I recognized how easy it is. You machine stitch the garment and then you sew the zipper in by hand. So you have the appearance of a machine stitch zipper when it's appropriate, but it's easy to put in like a hand sewn zipper.
Well, I think that's actually really smart. And I know what your technique is because I've worked with you a little bit on a story with that. And I would say that a lot of people don't necessarily think hand sewing is easier, but I'm pretty sure you would argue with that and say that the control you get from that is worth the time that it takes.
I would agree. It gives you control, but I've had professionals come to my workshops who did not baste before they came. And after they left, they began basting, and they said they really saved time by basting their garments before they stitch. It eliminates ripping.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what are you currently sewing?
Well, I could say mending, but that's not very professional. So I'll say I'm working on conservation. This is a time when I'm going through my collection of designer garments, looking to see which garments need to have buttons resewn, linings resewn, because I often take the linings, or I rip them somewhat so we can see the interfacings inside, or if they need to be hems, or if I really want to leave them just the way they are so we can look inside again next time. So we'll say we're doing conservation. We're not making anything new.
That's pretty good. What is your favorite fabric to sew?
Wool. And it's hard for it to be my favorite fabric to sew because I live in the desert and obviously don't have an opportunity to wear wool as much in the desert. But you can do so much with it. You really just have to learn to handle it, to shrink it and stretch it, to the many things you can do with it to shape it into the design that you want, which you really can't achieve with most other fibers.
Yeah. And the final question is, what do you love most about sewing?
I think sewing gives you an independence. If you are a person who makes garments, then you can create whatever you want. You can't make an expensive automobile, but you can make a very expensive dress at a fraction of the cost. But if you only know the very basics of sewing, it gives you the independence. You don't have to put aside the dress you wanted to wear because it needs a button or the hem needs to be resewn. You can do it yourself. And so I think independence is the most important thing that you learn when you learn to sew.
Claire, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about your collecting of beautiful designer garments. Could you tell me a little bit about how you started collecting garments?
I had done a lot of research in museums, but that's somewhat limited because you can't look at the insides of garments in a museum. They frown upon you ripping out the linings and peeking in. Although if there is a little rip, you can't peek. I was told that by someone else who was a well-known a researcher. In any event, it gave me the opportunity to have garments of my own that if I wanted to take the linings out, I could do that. But to see how garments were made in haute couture. I was trained at a trade technical school, and what I learned was how garments are made at all price points. So I knew how the cheapest garments were made and how the most expensive. But what you learn in school is how to do things, not always how to apply what you know. As I went to workrooms, I could learn more about how the techniques that I knew were applied to various garments. So the application was important. But garments that I purchased, even from the beginning, were all based on what could I write about that the home sewer could profit from me writing. Many times it's writing about something they already know and applying it in a different manner. But the collection's rather large. It got out of hand. And there are over 2,000 pieces.
Oh my gosh. Claire, do you wear any of them, Claire? Are they your size, any of them?
Some of them are, and some of them I do wear.
Yeah, good.
Some of them were bought to wear. Some of them I bought and never expected to wear and found that they fit. And then I wore them.
Very good to know.
But I do wear some of them. I'm rather careful about the ones that I wear, but and most of them don't fit, particularly the skirts from the 60s, because in that time, women wore girdles and they had tiny waists, and the skirts are, that's a figure they fit. But the jackets oftentimes will fit. And so I wear them with solids, but I've worn dresses as well. I bought a dress very cheaply at a thrift store in New York for $25 that was made in Bergdorf Goodman's custom salon. And it's a pretty lace dress. And my husband was receiving an honor and I put the dress on and wore it. So, and I was quite pleased with the way it looked.
That's good.
Claire, we know you're a Chanel collector. What are some of the other designers that you like to collect?
I have a lot of Yves Saint Laurent. I like the way Yves Saint Laurent structures the jackets. Many of them are very structured. They have bias cut interfacing in the body of the jacket, and everywhere except that one portion of the sleeve below the cap and just above the wrist. So the garment has a structure that it maintains for the life of the garment. And this is completely different from the soft structure of Chanel and designers like Armani. Sometimes the Dior's have this. I have a lot of Dior. I have bits and pieces of many designers. I have a Schiaparelli jacket, and I did not include it in my most recent book because it has a fur collar. And you got that little bit of a problem with people who are anti-fur today. But I've got some nice Balmains, some nice Balenciagas, particularly in suits, which is where I think they were really very strong. And I have some nice evening gowns. And when you start buying, what you find is everyday dresses are not easy to find because the original purchaser usually wore them out. And they never went to thrift shops or to resale shops. And by comparison, suits, they outgrew the skirts or the blouse deteriorated under the arms. So the jackets oftentimes are in much better shape than either the skirts or the blouses, and oftentimes they've lost their blouse or skirt, and so you many times have just a jacket that doesn't have the rest of its outfit.
Do you have any particular, I'm not going to ask you for the names of the places you go, but do you basically go through thrift stores or consignment or places that you just happen to know will have good supply?
Actually, I buy a lot of things at auction sight unseen.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I look at what their photos they're showing me, and if I have questions, I'll ask questions about it. Most important thing I'm asking on questions is what kind of damage does it have? I don't mind it having damage if the price is right. Mm-hmm. And even if the price is more moderate or I would say somewhat expensive. I bought 2 Balenciaga evening gowns a couple of years ago, and they are in very bad shape. They were offered to me because they knew I would not take the label out and sell the labels. And one of those, we've made a line for line pattern and a muslin of it, and it would be quite wearable today. One of my colleagues used the pattern to make a short dress for Mother of the Bride affair. So, but I buy at auction, and a few dealers will offer things to me. There is a problem in the resale market of people selling labels and putting them on different garments. So they know that that's not what I'm going to do.
Do people ever come to you looking for authentication of designer garments?
I don't authenticate. I can tell you what to look for. Mm-hmm. And some garments are easier to authenticate than others are. I have a suit that's a Chanel copy that I looked at for quite a long while, looking at the jacket. And when I decided to look at some of the other pieces, because I have the blouse as well, the blouse told me everything I needed to know that it was a copy and it was not a couture suit, because the machine stitching was there to speak for itself.
Oh.
But did you feel that the jacket was a pretty good?
The jacket is very well made. And I have a colleague that owns that suit that's a couture model. And I would like very much to compare my suit to his to identify the differences. I do have 2 different pairs where I have the original Chanel suit and a line for line copy of that particular suit. And they're very interesting to compare because you can see, and to me as a teacher, this is what was very important or is very important, how a manufacturer could take a couture garment and they could make it using ready-to-wear techniques in about 10% of the price for the customer. What they had to do without losing the importance of the garment. And so in some instances, 2 garments can stand next to each other, and you've really got to look very, very hard to tell the difference. Yeah. You've got to know what to look for.
Yeah. Is this helpful for a home sewer who might be afraid to try a couture technique, but might think that they could achieve that look with a few of their regular machine sewn, methods of construction?
I think so. I think more importantly for the home sewer, once you have a design that you're comfortable with, you like the design, and you have a good pattern for that design, you want to look for ways that you can use that pattern more often. And as you use it 2nd, 3rd, 4th, however many times, every couture technique does not have to be done on every garment. You can use, maybe some quick techniques here and there. But if it's one of those might be thread tracing the seams, the seam lines, because in couture you match the seam lines rather than the cut edges. Well, if it's a straight seam, you don't necessarily need to thread trace the entire seam, but at corners and at difficult to stitch areas where you're putting two shapes together, then yes, you want to thread trace. But you can use some quick techniques. When I say quick, I don't use fusing, except very rarely. There are places where you might use fusing on a pocket, a patch pocket, or even the welt of a pocket. But once you fuse it, you can't shape it. So that's a bit of a problem there. But you might use a little square or circle to fuse a piece of interfacing at a corner where you're going to clip right into the corner. Right. But generally, you can use your better sewing techniques that you would use regularly along with couture techniques. And the thing in couture is when they say it's made by hand, what they are really saying is you take the garment sections and you shape those garment sections. If it's got a dart, you'll convert that dart to easing and you'll shape that into the shape you want it to be rather than stitching the dart, which will interfere with the lines of the garment. So those are the things you would want to preserve from couture techniques.
Yes, Claire, you did a fascinating article for us, and I just had a chance to look it up. It was the Chanel jacket comparison, the differences between haute couture and ready-to-wear. Yes. And that was in number 187, so October, November 2016. And in that article, you talked about some of those fascinating differences. Yeah.
And you see some of the same things. There's nobody really copying Chanel today because Chanel does not allow it. But if you go back to the 60s and the early 70s, where they were selling the rights to copy, in fact, Chanel made more selling the rights to copy than she made selling haute couture. But those things are really very usable by home sewers, and they're good techniques. But in a Chanel ready-to-wear, they will still have a dart rather than shaping the dart section into an ease.
So when she licensed her designs to, I guess a lot of times it was in the United States, but maybe elsewhere, did she have a say in the techniques they would use, or was it just the way that it looked, the fabric and the overall silhouette?
No, she did not have a say. They would use their own techniques. There is a collection at FIT in the library, special collections of some of the things from David Dow. There'll be sketches. Some of the sketches have the swatch of the fabric, and they will tell you along with the sketch exactly what you needed to make it, like your pattern guide does on the back of the envelope, how much fabric you needed, how many zippers, how many buttons, the things, everything you needed. In addition, they would tell you where to go get it. So, and so many of the copy manufacturers would use the exact fabric. But at Orbox, they said that they use the exact fabrics, but sometimes it was just too expensive, so they would buy an American-made fabric. And one of my copies is made from an American-made fabric. The fabric's not exactly the same as the original.
Claire, would it be accurate to maybe say that couture techniques are not necessarily always more difficult, but they require time investment that probably ready-to-wear makers did not put into garments?
They do. They take much more time. Most of the techniques are not difficult, but it takes time to thread trace and to hand baste. One of the most difficult is the hand thread buttonhole, and it takes time to learn to sew it properly. Another is one of the trims, which Chanel used on several different suits, is very difficult to make. But most of the techniques are not difficult, but they take time. And many of them are things that home sewers can duplicate.
Yeah. Claire, what decades, what year span does your collection cover?
Primarily post-World War II. I have a few things that are early 40s and a very few things that are prior to the 40s, but it's late 20th century and a few pieces in 21st century.
And what initially appealed to you about collecting from that period?
Well, they were available. And I looked at what does a home sewer want to know? And for the most part, they're not interested in what was in garments in the 20s and the 30s. V&A is not a designer that I collect because I can't write about how to drape a bias garment. I can write about the techniques that V&A used in sewing them, but not how to physically make the pattern. That was not the thing that I did best. And what I find easier to write about is how the actual construction, how the garments are made. So I wrote about what I thought people wanted to learn.
You seem to come at this from the point of view of how you can teach people to sew better. But I wanted to ask you, because you and I share a background a little bit in that we're both art historians initially.
Yes.
How much did that influence the kinds of things that you choose to buy? And how you even look at the construction of the clothes?
I hadn't thought about that. I went back to school my second time to get an art history degree because I was interested in art. And quite honestly, I never planned to work. It was one of those things that after we moved to Palm Springs, I was not happy without a focus that would take a certain amount of time in my life to fill time when I was alone. And I do think that it made a difference, though, because it's not so much how I look at the garments as it is, why did I come to it in the first place? Because many costume historians majored in art history. But I took what I knew once I was in the desert. I already knew what I needed to know. I knew things that had not been written. And so I thought that I just needed a purpose, and my purpose was to go out and write things that had not been written, and hopefully somebody else wanted to know them.
Claire, can you tell us a little bit about how you store and maintain your collection? If you have any tips for garment preservation?
I have I used to have a 2-bedroom guest house. I now have a 2-bedroom storage for most of my garments. And I did install one of those heating, cooling units in each of the rooms. So in the summertime, it's the coolest place to go. But all of the closets in the house are full. So they benefit from the air conditioning and heat in the house. I keep things covered. I found that in the guest house, there isn't a problem with light because I have the shades down, but I keep them covered anyway, just so there's no dust around. In the house, I had a rack in front of a window that had a shade, and I had some fading, and I realized that this was something I had to consider. So I cover them with just either a clean sheet or a piece of Tyvek. I don't have enough Tyvek to cover all of the racks, but I like Tyvek, and this is one of the materials that the museums have used to make garment covers. So I feel good about that. But I had a lot of old sheets, and they cover things up well.
Now, where you are, do you have to worry about moths? Do you do anything special for your wool?
I have a problem with crickets. Crickets like wool too, and also you have silverfish, but they are not as much of a problem with the garments as they are with books. My exterminator comes once a month, but I go out periodically with those bombs and bomb so that any of those little moths want to go in. this is not the place for them. We're going to take care of them before they move in.
Now, Claire, are you currently collecting, or are you starting to divest yourself of the big collection you have?
Well, it's hard not to collect. Yeah. And when you see something that you think would be an addition to your collection, you look at it again, maybe 2 or 3 times to decide, do I really need this? And yes, I bought a suit a couple of weeks ago. It's a Dior suit. So, yes, I'm still collecting, but I'm not buying as much. And we are looking for a school, because my collection is a teaching collection, not really an exhibition collection, but we're looking for a school that we can give the collection to when I retire. The difference in an exhibition is I have a few, really, I'd say a handful of garments that are museum quality for various reasons, but I bought most garments because of what they have to tell the home sewer or students. Again, back to the comparison of ready-to-wear and couture, because a student has got to know how to take the couture looks that are being shown and convert them into garments that will sell at regular price points.
Yeah. Claire, I noticed the garments in the background are all tagged.
Yes.
Could you tell me how you label your garments and what kind of information you keep?
The tag on the garment has a number. Every garment has a number. That's how we know how many we have. I learned in the last 6 months that I have not tagged them correctly, because initially we only tagged the jacket in a suit and not necessarily the blouse and skirt. Well, the skirt's really important, especially if you're looking for a navy blue skirt and you don't know which jacket it goes to. So right now, one of my conservation projects is to be sure all of the pieces have the number. And the other thing I am putting on the label, which we did not do at the outset, is the name of the designer. So I don't have to look at the garment itself. I can just look at the tag and see who the designer is. And there are many garments I can look at. I don't have to look at the name, but there are a lot as well that, are they Balmain or Carvan? Who might they have been designed by? And so I don't have to take it off the rack in order to look at it, because you have to be very careful when the racks are high that you take them off holding only the hanger and you don't pick them up by the top of the garment, the neck of the garment. One, you don't want them to get dirty, but also if you do that enough, you literally will wear the garments out.
Was there ever a garment that got away? Something that...
Yes, there were.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things, but they obviously were not so important that I think back and say, I really wish I had bought that. I did have the experience with one of the early Chanels, which I bought. It was going to auction, and it was at a time when I could not watch the auction to increase my bid. And my husband came through and I said, I really want this suit. And he said, well, did you bid enough? I said, I don't know. He said, well, maybe you should bid more. So I doubled my bid and learned later I was bidding against a dealer. And it took my bid to buy it. But it's the jacket on the front of the Chanel jacket book. It's just a stunning suit. And I've learned a lot from it. I looked at that garment for years when it was in the museum. And I did not know that the side body section was shaped. Once it was my garment, I looked at it more closely and I can see the shaping on the jacket, which was not apparent when I was looking at it earlier.
Oh, I have a quick question about that shaping. If you have a garment that has been shaped, it's wool, and obviously you would steam it and shrink and stretch it a bit. if you sent it to a dry cleaner and they handled it wrong, could they undo that shaping?
Most of the time, you're going to have something that's very lightweight, like maybe a little plain weave silk that would be lightly sewn to the underside, and it would hold the shape.
Okay.
And you might do that also if you are easing wool, where you've taken the dart out and you've eased it, is to put a little rectangle in, and the rectangle will have the original dart, but the wool would have the easing in it.
I asked that question. It was a dumb question to ask. I know that is a direction in one of your jacket patterns.
Yes.
To put that little dart stay behind the dart. That's right.
Yes. But that saves it from the dry cleaner.
Yeah.
Well, Claire, it's been so wonderful to talk with you. I'm sorry you couldn't see my reaction. I can see both of you. But we've come to the end of our time today. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. And please, everyone, keep looking to Threads for more stories from Claire. We're going to have some articles from her coming up. And Claire, when is your couture tailoring book going to be available?
It won't be released until next January because of the pandemic. We have the same problems everybody else has.
Sure. To that.
Yeah.
I think you will like it.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Claire. It was very good to talk to you.
I've enjoyed the visit.
Thank you for listening. Follow Threads on social media and visit threadsmagazine.com to view show notes for this episode. While you're on the site, check out Threads Insider, our online membership with exclusive access to expert sewing techniques. Until next time, keep on sewing with Threads.